Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this lighter footprint events on Make Solar Easy. My name is Richard Heading and I'm part of the Energy Transition Group within Lighter Footprints. I am joining today's meeting from Glen Iris in the city of Boroondara and acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as traditional owners and original custodians of this land, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. Lighter Footprints is excited to be partnering with the Metropolitan Community Power Hub, and we're delighted to be hosting this online event to make solar easy. We will be providing some fantastic information and hope that it will help you find answers to your questions on solar power and, more importantly, to take the next steps along your journey towards installing or upgrading your solar power system. Rooftop solar is very popular, slashing energy bills, lowering your carbon footprints, and moving towards energy self-sufficiency. However, for many people, the biggest barrier is advice to the right information. So this is where the Metro Community Power Hub can offer independent advice, connecting you with trusted suppliers and discounted solar. The agenda tonight will comprise a 45-minute presentation from Lachlan Hensey, Community Energy Project Officer with the Metro Community Power Hub. It will then be followed by a session for questions and answers. So really important, can you please put your questions into the chat box? Annie, Niall and Ray Peck from Lighter Footprints will moderate the Q&A session after Lachlan's spoken. Then finally, Mick Nolan from Lighter Footprints will ask for any quick feedback and show you the next steps and wrap up the event. So we should be finished somewhere around an hour and 15 minutes from now. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Lachlan Hensey, Community Energy Project Officer with the Metro Community Power Hub, and an experienced solar advisor who will guide us through the discussion on the right kind of setup, what sort of panels, size of system, heritage factors, whether a battery should be included, and how the Metro Community Power Hub can help with choosing suppliers and installers. Lachlan is a Community Energy Project Officer where he provides tailored energy advice to households across Melbourne and develops energy projects through the Metro Community Power Hub. Lachlan is dedicated to supporting community involvement in Australia's clean energy transition. He holds a deep interest in public issues involving science and technology, especially how local communities can participate in innovative responses to contemporary issues such as climate crisis. As a researcher, he has investigated the politics of deliberate technological interventions into the climate system. He's committed to working towards a more resilient, adaptive and democratic energy system and a more accessible and sustainable society. Lachlan has worked across the disability, creative, arts and environment sectors. So with that, please welcome Lachlan.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you to Mick and Sally and everyone at Lighter Footprints for having me along and organising this event. I'm stoked to be here. I might share my screen to kick things off. And has that gone off without a hitch?
Yep, that's good.
Excellent. So as I said, I'm really happy to be here to chat about solar and, if we have time for it, home energy efficiency and how to go all electric. It's a great thing that you can do to address the climate crisis in your own backyard. It makes a difference in a very tangible way. It may not seem like it when you're thinking it through, but when you actually look at the data, the things we do in our households can make a really sizable difference in how the energy system works and the overall emissions intensity of the grid. So it's great to have a supportive audience. There's nothing wrong with preaching to the converted, and I'm hopeful that most people here are solar converts. or at least you will be after this session. I'm going to try and keep things relatively streamlined because I want to prioritize time for questions and let everyone here determine the real scope of what we talk about. So, as Richard's introduction explained, I'm a Community Energy Project Officer at Yarra Energy Foundation, and YEF is a not-for-profit working, we exist to support not just the city of Yarra, but all of metropolitan Melbourne to bring emissions from energy down to zero. And it's one of the exciting avenues through which we pursue that goal is the Metro Community Power Hub, which I'll talk more about later. So my role is to develop and deliver community energy projects, provide energy advice. I have an interest especially in energy literacy and sharing knowledge about energy throughout the community, building capacity for the community to be involved in the energy transition that's currently taking place. Traditionally, this has been a pretty technical, esoteric sector in society, and it's really exciting to see all the ways that the community is diving into this space out of necessity, perhaps, and the sort of creative interventions that are happening as well. So my background is a mix of disability support program coordination, environmental policy and politics, and research. I'm not a solar installer or an electrical engineer, but it's something that I've just become more and more obsessed with over my time with YEF. And my focus is on finding trustworthy information to help guide decision-making with an eye to the future. And my priorities are on emissions reductions and cost savings for households. So the Metro Community Power Hub, or MCPH, is one of 7 hubs established by Sustainability Victoria with funding from the Victorian Government. And our overarching aim is to accelerate the transition to renewables by cultivating interest and the delivery of community energy projects, as well as supporting energy efficiency and generation measures throughout the community at the household level. Along with that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a focus on energy literacy and knowledge sharing and capacity building. Some of our key projects and programs are the Solar and All Electric Home program, which will sort of be the context we're working with today. We have an avenue for anyone to book free personal energy consultations with either the folks at Renew, who are one of our partners at the MCPH, or with myself at YEF. We're running energy literacy workshops. A big one is community battery feasibility studies. This is a nascent sort of part of the energy system, and it's going to be something that we think is really integral and really useful, not just for the grid, but in allowing more solar on rooftops throughout the suburbs. And it's one of the things that is great to do in an urban setting. Lots of community energy projects work well in regional areas where you might have a bit more space available. In an urban setting, a community battery is a fantastic way to reduce overall emissions and allow for the installation of more solar and potentially reduce prices as well. Along with community batteries, the guide to solar for apartments is something that we're pursuing, and that's going to be key to decarbonising urban settings as well. And so far, it doesn't seem like there is a document that is comprehensive in its scope or instructional in nature to help apartment dwellers achieve solar on their rooftop. Just to go through the program briefly, our aim is to support as many people to be able to access solar and provide the advice that's necessary along the way. We've arranged for up to 20% off standard pricing. There's more about pricing to come. I know that that's something that everyone would love to hear about. So you can consider YEF your sort of trusted partners throughout the process, a third party, if you will, and we're here to follow up if there are any issues along the way, or if you'd like us to check over the quote, if you'd like advice about how to optimize your system, that sort of thing. We're here to provide that advice and guidance for free. And along with solar, transitioning to an all-electric home using a heat pump hot water system, induction cooktop, and efficient electric heating and cooling is something that we're happy to advise on, as are Renew. So there's, as I mentioned right at the start, I may have been before the recording, there's so many directions we could go in tonight. The items on the left are the things that I wanted to focus on. If we get time for it at the end, I have some slides on going all electric, and I'm always happy to chat about energy efficiency. So sizing, I guess I've based this presentation off the main things that come up in consultations that I give. So there are other aspects like, you know, slate roofs or terracotta tiles, heritage issues that I haven't listed here. I'm happy to have a go answering questions, but I just wanted to get these key common questions into the slide deck, and the others we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. So the typical household energy consumption, I think this is a good place to start, just to get a feel for how much we might be using in our homes per day. First, a note on the difference between power and energy. Power is essentially a flow rate. It's how much energy is being drawn at any one time. That's electrical energy. Your kettle probably draws about 2 kilowatts or 2000 watts of power. If you left it on for an hour, which I don't recommend, it'd use 2 kilowatt hours of energy. So power is measured in watts, often kilowatts. Often we're thinking in that sort of scale, especially at the household level, and a kilowatt is 1000 watts. Energy is often measured in kilowatt hours. So quite simply, power multiplied by time equals energy. That's not a definition of energy. That's just how to calculate energy consumption or generation based on the power that's being drawn or generated. So here we can see the rough averages of kilowatt hours used per day per household. So a 2-person household uses about 12 kilowatt hours of energy per day. Up above 5 people, you're usually above 16 kilowatt hours. But in reality, this varies a great deal. This is very much just a statistical average. It doesn't really account for the various factors at play. So more people living together is going to be more efficient as they can share resources. It's really handy when you're considering your solar system to have an idea of how much energy you use, and particularly when you use it, and I'll come to that later. So these figures are very general, and in fact, I think they're far higher than we'd like, and probably higher than necessary. A bit of knowledge and a bit of energy awareness can go a very long way. What we consider to be essential, desirable, and indulgent will also play a role. I also want to make the point that energy efficiency is not necessarily about making sacrifices. In fact, if anything, it's about enhancing your comfort and making the best use of what you have. I don't want this to be about sacrifice. This is about doing what makes the most sense. So what size system do I need? Some people will advise you to fill your roof. I'm hesitant to say that, as you might have a very big roof and minimal energy needs, and you may not be able to export what you don't consume, let alone profit from it. Having said that, I do think it's advisable to opt for a system of at least 5 to 6.6 kilowatts. The panels are only one part of the cost of the system, so doubling the size doesn't necessarily mean doubling the cost. Even if you're not using 6.6 kilowatts of power when you are generating it, there's a good reason for sizing up. With 400 watt panels, 16 panels will get you to about 6.4 kilowatts. This depends a little on your roof, but it's often best to have a mix of east and west, especially west-facing solar arrays, to maximize the hours the system is generating power. North-facing roofs are always a solid bet. Incidentally, south-facing roofs, they're not ideal, but our south-facing roofs apparently do better than the south-facing roofs in Germany. And Germany, I think, has the highest solar penetration in Europe. So their south-facing roofs are oriented towards the equator. That's their best-facing roof, like our north-facing roof. And our south-facing roofs tend to do better than their north-facing roofs. So if you're in a pinch and you have to go for a south-facing roof, as the efficiency of panels continues to increase, it's not necessarily a bad option, certainly better than not going for solar at all. So one of the reasons I advise to size up where possible is that in summer at 9 AM or 6 PM, when the sun is low in the sky, your panels won't be producing anywhere near their full capacity. If you have a 3 kilowatt system producing a third of its capacity, it's going to be producing about 1 kilowatt of power. If you have a 6.6 kilowatt system, it's producing over 2 kilowatts of power. So more than double. Obviously, it's more than double the system size. But that's going to be important in the mornings and evenings when you're often using most of your power. That makes the bigger systems more valuable. So even if during the middle of the day, you may not be using much power, you might be exporting the bulk of what you're generating. If you have a bigger system in those peak periods in the morning and the evening, having that bigger system means you'll be generating more power to offset that usage. This is especially the case in winter when our solar systems are not able to generate as much energy as there's less daylight hours, less sunshine generally. So bigger systems are better able to offset our winter energy bills. This means that we can heat the house during the day using our solar generation. You might be able to program your split system to do that and import less energy from the grid in the evening. If you have high energy needs, say if you use a lot of technology, you're working from home, you're obsessed with welding, you like to use the spa a lot, you should always consider a bigger system. And in that case, might be worth upgrading your single phase connection to 3-phase. If you signal to the solar provider that this is what you're looking to do, they'll be able to include it in the quote. In fact, if you suggest a system above 6.6 kilowatts, they may even suggest it. That's because a single phase connection has an export limit, at least in the City Power network, of 5 kilowatts. And yeah, so in the City Power network, there's a 5 kilowatt export limit, and that's also for every single phase, you'll be limited at 5 kilowatts unless you upgrade to 3-phase power. There are potentially lower export limits in other networks, but in City Power, I think they've generally resolved their issues and the full 5 kilowatts per phase is available. Upgrading your connection to 3-phase is likely to be a good idea if you're transitioning to an all-electric home. You may need to, for one, if you have a lot of high-powered appliances. If you wanted to charge your electric vehicle, have a spa, cook using an induction cooktop, use your electric oven all at the same time, you'd best ensure your switchboard can handle it, that you have dedicated circuits for those things that need it. And the loads that your house will be generating are probably beyond what a single phase connection could handle. So that's if you're not powering that with your solar system. If you don't do these things yet, but you anticipate that you might in the future, it's a good idea to do it while you're installing your system. It's just a way of future-proofing your home electrical situation, for lack of a better term. So a solar array never generates 100% efficiency. So even at 12:30 PM in full sun, you're not likely to be getting 6.6 kilowatts of power out of a 6.6 kilowatt system. There are always minor losses in efficiency. Rarely will a 6.6 kilowatt system generate more than 5 kilowatts of power. And when it does, it'll only be for brief periods during the middle of the day. This isn't a problem for the inverter. Inverters are generally undersized within about 25% of the total solar array capacity. That's, I think, outlined in the Clean Energy Council guidelines or Clean Energy Regulator policy, one of those two things. It won't really be limiting your solar generation. Going for a larger inverter is likely to add cost to the system without necessarily much benefit, as it's usually not advisable to add panels to an existing system. I might touch on that more later. So generally, I've had questions from the community with, phrasing similar to, well, I've got a 3.8 kilowatt system and a 3 kilowatt inverter. What have the installers done? I'm missing out on 800 watts of generating power. That's not the case. Inverters are, in my experience, pretty much always sized under the total solar capacity. So this table is a great illustration of the sort of energy, not power, but the total energy that you're likely to produce on any given day, well, an average day in Melbourne. So average daily insolation is an estimate of the equivalent hours of sunshine per day across the year. So in Melbourne, this is, we use a 3.6 figure. It's not technically 3.6 hours. It's in the summer, it's likely to be higher than that. In winter, it's going to be less than that. Cloudy days obviously affect that. So again, we're dealing with a statistical average that doesn't necessarily correlate to most days in our experience. But if you were to have a 5 kilowatt system and you were calculating how much energy you'd produce over the year, you might use 5 kilowatts, or 5 times 3.6 times 365. But just for a single day, you can see that you generate about 18 kilowatt hours of energy. So if you look and you see that your daily energy consumption is around 18 kilowatt hours and you put a 5 kilowatt system on, remember that you're not going to be able to offset everything that you generate. You'll only be able to offset the energy that you use during daylight hours, which is a big reason, and I'm going to emphasize this more later, to shift as much of your energy consumption as you can to the day. In fact, even if you don't have solar, doing that will lead to emissions reductions because there are a higher proportion of renewables in the grid during the day because of all the rooftop solar. So it's a great thing to remember. It's also good practice if you have a time of use tariff, say you're, just say you're a shift worker and you do disability support work like I used to, and you work night shifts. You might get home, or you might be getting up. Well, let's set this up properly. You're going to be sleeping through what most people's peak period is, say from 3 till 9 p.m. So if you have a time of use tariff, you might have a cheaper tariff for all of your waking hours and a more expensive tariff when you're asleep. That's a great way of doing things. So you might shift your energy use to the nighttime. Obviously, if you went for a solar system, you might not do that. So that's a bit of an inverse of the example. Now, a battery's worth it. This very much depends on what your priorities are. If your priorities are reducing emissions, then that, whether it's worth it is a calculation you'll have to make. They can certainly increase emissions reductions. Don't know if that's phrased appropriately. They can certainly reduce your emissions by further reducing grid consumption. The unfortunate matter is the price. We've been expecting batteries to come down in price. It has not eventuated to the extent that we'd like, and payback periods, it seems that they're generally longer than the warranty periods. So that might be some cause for concern. It's not necessarily a strong return on investment. There's every chance that the batteries outlive the payback period. But in terms of my conservative advice giving with my advice hat on, it's not something that I would advocate for unless you had the disposable income and you wanted to focus on emissions reductions. They're generally priced around $1,000 per kilowatt hour capacity. So if you're looking for a 10 kilowatt hour battery, you'd be looking at least $10,000. And in terms of sizing your battery, you would ideally be looking at your energy consumption outside of daylight hours, or your grid consumption essentially. So what you're paying for grid consumption, you would calculate how much you're using from the grid and then size the battery according to that. There are Solar Victoria rebates for batteries. They're, I think, $3,500. Unfortunately, the eligibility is a little bit tricky in that it's the same eligibility requirements of the solar rebate and the efficient hot water rebate. And one of the caveats is that if you've already received a rebate from Solar Victoria, you're not eligible for another one. So if you received a rebate for a solar system, you won't be eligible for the battery rebate. There are also some other eligibility requirements around income and the value of your property. Just a note on cheap deals. Occasionally I'm asked about a leaflet in the mail or a Facebook ad or something like that. Batteries close to free or super cheap. Generally, if they sound too good to be true, they are. What I advise is jumping onto Google whoever that provider is. There might be a forum post, a few people might be talking about it. I've done this myself and came across a company that seems to rename itself every couple of years. They get accredited by the Clean Energy Council and they have another go. Often they use misleading claims. They might have batteries for super cheap, but they're tiny, so they're not much use to anyone, and their bigger offerings are even more expensive than standard offerings. So I don't know, yeah, I think this is suitably emphasized. I was going to say, I don't know if I can emphasize it enough, but I think everyone engaging with solar will understand this. The more that you can shift your energy use to the daylight hours, that's money you're saving and emissions you're reducing. There's a few ways you can do this. You can do it by just shifting your energy use habits. When you do your laundry, when you put the dishwasher on, or you can program these things. So if you have a reverse cycle air conditioner, a split system for your heating and cooling, you might be able to program it to turn on at, just say it's winter and the sun's going down around 5:30. You might have it running from 12 to 4, powered by as much as possible by your solar system. And that's going to warm up the air in your house so that when you do come home, you don't have to turn it on then and use grid supplied energy. So there are a few shifts you can do, might require a little bit of planning, but in the end, it might actually be easier for you that way. So you could, I think you can program dishwashers these days, you can program your laundry, heating and cooling, and if you were to elect to get a heat pump hot water system, you can certainly program them to heat during the day as well. Transitioning to an all-electric home, that's, I guess, the next step for a lot of people once they've installed a solar system. So I mentioned the heat pump hot water system, reverse cycle split systems. The induction cooktop is often one of the final hurdles. It's a little bit complex. You do need a gas plumber and an electrician to manage that installation. Depending on what you're replacing, you may need a cabinet maker to sort out the sizing. So it's worth, if you can, pick an induction cooktop that matches the size of your gas cooktop or resistive electric cooktop, so that you don't need to make those modifications to your benchtop. One of the financial benefits for doing that final step is that you can stop paying supply charges for your gas connection. You can have your meter removed. Maybe that's something we can touch on in the Q&A. You simply have to contact your gas retailer and make the request. I've heard of all manner of prices. It does vary depending on which retailer you're with and where you are. But my advice would be to push back where possible, because Australian gas networks who manage our gas network around here. They don't charge the retailer to do the works. It's the retailer that charges that price. I imagine there's inevitably going to be some sort of fee, but you push back so that you're not paying an exorbitant fee, which undermines the cost savings that you would get from going all electric. So this is the second part of my answer to, are batteries worth it? You may be better off buying an electric vehicle, especially when vehicle to grid charging is a technology that's more widely available. So pairing an EV with a solar system or electric home makes a lot of sense for obvious intuitive reasons. There are some issues with their availability and pricing due to the regulatory landscape. Our various governments may not have done enough. In fact, they may have disincentivized electric vehicles, which is unfortunate, but thankfully, I think it's likely to change a lot very quickly. Another point worth noting is that EV batteries are generally much bigger than household domestic batteries, and they serve multiple purposes. So I've always been interested in cycling and ultralight hiking, and multi-function items are the way to go. One of the best ways you can save weight is have an item that is able to perform multiple tasks. So having an electric vehicle, if you're able to use that to power your house in the evenings, then you've hit two birds with one stone, essentially. And just to give an indication of EV battery sizes, I think they're in the region of 40 kilowatt hours to 100. Maybe some of them are a little bit smaller. Some of the larger EVs coming out now around 100 kilowatt hour batteries, which is pretty enormous. So based on that, don't expect to fully charge your EV with your solar system at home. If we go back to this table, on a good day, let's say you have a 10 kilowatt system. Let's say an average day, you might produce 36 kilowatt hours of energy. If you are charging your car throughout the whole day, and it was one of the smallest EVs, or at least smaller EVs, you might be able to fully charge it. But that's not something that you should be sort of banking on doing regularly. That's obviously accounting for all of your energy generation. So something to keep in mind is people sometimes imagine that they can get a solar system and then power their car up. It's certainly worth considering. It depends a little bit on how much you use your car every day. If you're just using it to run down to the shops, that sort of thing, pretty small trips, maybe you can just top it up. But in terms of fully charging the car and going on longer drives, it might be the case that you're better off charging on a controlled load tariff overnight. And you might be better off charging at work. In the future, where you work might have an enormous solar system, and you can access cheap vehicle charging, and then you can take that energy home and power your home. So one of the exciting things about EVs is that energy storage becomes mobile. So as the grid evolves and as EVs become normalized, we will have little batteries on wheels moving around the city, transporting energy. So I think we're beginning to see EVs as more than just vehicles. They're mobile energy storage, and they can offer a lot more than traditional combustion vehicles. I recognize that it's after 8. How are we going for time?
Yeah, I think pretty good, Lachlan.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Well,
all right. I've got another 5 or 6 or 7 slides, but I intend to sort of whip through them quickly and get on to questions. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, I think that should be good.
Yeah, great. So when we were planning this, we discussed that it might be helpful to have some, not quite case studies, but just examples of the sort of situations people might find themselves in and what might be a recommended approach to take. So if we look at a family of 5, they might have teenage kids that are into gaming, using a lot of technology, could be some large screen televisions, that sort of thing, might be planning an EV. Maybe someone has a disability, needs to use a hydrotherapy spa. There could be other high energy intensive support needs, maybe a lot of laundries going on. In this sort of situation, you might want to max everything out. So you'd be upgrading to a 3-phase connection. You might opt for a 15 kilowatt system. This is going to cover a lot of bases, a bit of a security net. Might not need to worry too much about your energy bills from here on in, if you were to get a battery as well. So opting for a battery, you can install the battery after installing the inverter, or ideally in this case, you'd opt for a hybrid inverter which has battery capability, and you do it all in one go. It doesn't necessarily matter to do it afterwards. It's certainly possible, and a lot of people go that way. If you have the opportunity, there might be some benefit to doing it with a hybrid inverter, a little bit more technical. It might be just a bit smoother, and you might have better monitoring and that sort of thing. So in terms of pricing, this is going to be very expensive. There's no two ways about it. All of these things add up. A battery, say if you went for 15 kilowatt hours of battery storage, you'd be looking up around $15,000 just for the battery. The solar system, this varies a lot depending on components and installers. It's also a very large system, so I don't feel quite comfortable sort of quoting. But there are obvious benefits to this. If this is something that is going to support the family in everything that they do, if there are special circumstances and it enables them to go all electric and reduce their emissions, then this is a fantastic approach. The only issue might be the capital expenditure up front. A smaller scale, perhaps a couple planning an energy efficient all electric home, may have just bought a property, not quite sure of future needs, maybe not quite sure of current energy use in this house. You might be looking to do some draft proofing and window treatments and that sort of thing. And especially if you're environmentally minded, you might be quite minimal or efficient energy users. For now, I'd recommend staying with a single phase connection. I wouldn't go for a battery. That's something you can consider later on when prices come down, or you might opt for an EV with vehicle to grid or bidirectional charging capability. I would recommend, if it's within budget, getting a heat pump hot water system. This is a great way to maximize the benefits you're getting from your solar system, because you can set them to charge during the day. They might use 1 or 2 kilowatts for an hour or two, so not huge energy users. But if you have excess solar generation, these days there's minimal benefit to exporting to the grid. I think we're down to new export tariffs are just under 6 cents, I think, per kilowatt hour. Having said all of that, I wouldn't go below the 6.6 kilowatt system. You can add panels. I wouldn't suggest adding them to an existing system, but you can add a second system, or you can also add panels using microinverters. So you can add a single panel with a microinverter. Microinverter serves the same purpose as a string inverter, which is the inverter for a whole solar array. But with microinverters, you install one microinverter per panel. So for now, there's no reason to believe that a 6.6 kilowatt system won't be sufficient for this couple. But if they find a need for more solar generation down the track, maybe in 5 or 10 years, there'll be more efficient panels, better technology on offer, and that's something they can add later on with microinverters. Finally, the low consumption household. Perhaps this household is retired, maybe not a great deal of disposable income. At this point, not planning any renovations. That's something for the next owners of the house to consider, just aiming to reduce energy expenses. I'd recommend looking at heating and cooling, so perhaps upgrading to a multi-head split system. This is a split system with one external heat pump, but several heads. You might have one in the main bedroom, one in the living room, and one elsewhere, wherever it's most appropriate. They might not be ready to replace the hot water system, but if it's, say, 15, 20 years old, I'd definitely recommend preparing for the day when it dies and preparing to budget for a heat pump hot water system. And I've put a 5 kilowatt system here just because I don't recommend going below that. I think at this point, 5 kilowatts is about the floor that I'd recommend. If 5 kilowatts was far too extensive for your energy needs, then perhaps there are certain situations where solar may not be an economic investment. I live in a rental property and our daily household energy use is between 2 and 5 kilowatt hours. I'd struggle to make a solar system worthwhile for us in the short term. So it's not something that I can really convince the landlord on, I don't think. Having said that, if we installed a solar system, maybe I'd be more frivolous with my energy use. But at this stage, I don't feel I need to. There's nothing that I'm missing out on in life, I don't think. So pricing is a tricky business. I am hesitant to advise specifics on pricing. I will say there are many factors involved. I imagine we'll get a question on this, so I will go into more detail then. My advice is to always seek several quotes, even if you go through the MCPH solar and all-electric home program. I just think it's good practice to get several quotes, even for your own peace of mind and understanding of what goes into a solar system. If the quote seems expensive, discuss any modifications, see where the costs are derived from. You can seek advice from me or even with the folks at Renew. This is some sort of average guesstimation of pricing from solarquotes.com.au, which is run by Finn Peacock. It's a really handy resource. A lot of great guides, a lot of topics that people come across in their solar journey. He's covered on that website. And you can see that depending on the installers and the components used, it can vary quite a lot. Things like terracotta tiles, complex roofs, so several different levels, several different solar arrays if you were to have one on east, north and west, three-phase connections and opting for premium inverters. This will all add up. Just another point on microinverters. Microinverters can be a little bit more expensive, especially if you have a large system, because there's one inverter for each panel. On a much smaller system, they can actually end up being cheaper. But generally, they're considered to be a little bit of a premium product. They're built for durability because they're housed on the roof where they're exposed to the elements. So that they can suit certain situations. Certainly, the more panels you have in your system, the more the costs are going to add up though. So that's something to consider. I'm not sure if everyone can read this. This is taken from our website. It's just a little infographic of how our solar and all-electric home program works. Step one is to register your interest on mcph.org.au/contact-us/ There's a contact form there which has some more of this information. There's a second contact form where you can request an energy consultation or a little guidance session with myself. So often if you register and you request that, I'll get in touch and might be able to answer some questions. A lot of the questions that people tend to have are actually best served by just getting the indicative quote. When it comes to site-specific factors, there's a limit to what I can tell you without actually being a solar installer myself and having the things like the pricing and which components they'll use. So step 2, I pass your contact details on to our vetted suppliers, and they'll get in touch with you within a week, ideally. And usually they'll request an energy bill. On this energy bill is your national metering identifier. Using that, they'll access your consumption data. This is important, along with the tariffs on your bill, to calculate the payback period, the return on investment, and it will also help you guide which size system is most appropriate. Having done that, they'll present the indicative quote. You might want to modify a few things here or there. If you accept the indicative quote with modifications, perhaps they'll move towards putting a more formalized quote together, potentially a site visit. It doesn't always involve a site visit to do a more formal quote. If the formal quote, if you're happy with that, and hopefully at this point you are, you might pay a deposit, and the process then moves on to booking an installation. After installation, a clean, the certificate of electrical safety must be completed. That involves a safety inspection from a electrical safety inspector. And from there, there's a few processes that have to take place with the distribution network service provider. So the meter has to be programmed to export as well as import power. So sometimes there's a couple of weeks to a month from the safety inspection before you're able to export power. But after the safety inspection, you will still be using your solar system. So once it's switched on, it'll be offsetting your grid consumption, even if you're not exporting. So that's the long and the short of it, in my view. There's obviously a lot more that we could go into, but let's get into the questions while we still have time.
Thanks, Lachlan. I think I've got the first question, which is a little bit speaking to how you can understand what your energy consumption patterns are before you get solar installed. So this person's asking, what's the best way to understand what your energy consumption patterns are?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple of ways that I'd recommend. I recommend doing both. The first is something that we're actually chatting about, and Mick was showing us at the start of this session. I'm not sure if it was caught on the recording, but there's a device called a PowerPal. Through a government program, they're being freely installed. You just have to register your interest, and one of the accredited installers will come and install this device in your smart meter. And it's a Bluetooth device which communicates with an app. So you get this app on your phone, the PowerPal is installed, and it registers your energy consumption from the grid in real time. So what's interesting about that is you can walk around your house with your phone and you can turn your kettle on. You can see how much it draws. You can turn your air conditioner on and see if it's cycling. If it's drawing energy constantly, or if it's just drawing energy to reach a certain point and then simmering down a little. And you can then see across a 24-hour period what your energy consumption looks like. You can look over the course of a month and see what sort of patterns there are. So that's a really fine-grained way of viewing your energy consumption from the grid. Another way is to go to your energy bill, your electricity bill, and look at your NMI, the National Metering Identifier. And if you go to whatever your network, your distribution network service provider's website is, so I think in Boroondara, it's likely to be, is it AusNet or is it City Power? Maybe it's United. I'm not actually sure. In my area, it's Gemina. I'm not in Boroondara.
I think it's City Power, and we're on the border of lower limit on the border of AusNet. Sorry, United, and on the eastern limit on the border of AusNet.
Yeah. That sounds about right. It's a bit of a golden triangle there. So irrespective of which network you're on, they should all have a portal where you can enter your NMI and the details of the account holder for your electricity bill. And from there, you can download your consumption data in a CSV file, which is an Excel, basically an Excel spreadsheet. There's actually a third way of doing it, which is sort of a bit like this. If you're, sorry, I'll just take a step back. When you're on that portal, at least on City Power have a great portal where you can see a graph of your energy consumption and your export. You don't necessarily have to download a CSV file. You can see, generally these networks will provide you some graphs demonstrating this sort of information, not necessarily in a table format. You can download the table if you want to have fun with it and put together your own sort of graphs and that sort of thing. And this is in interval data, so it's in half-hourly intervals. The third option is to go to Victorian Energy Compare, which is a website which allows you to compare retail offers, and you can input your NMI. You don't need to go to the portal. You just input your NMI and it will get your data. It'll fetch it from the network itself, and it will use your consumption data to recommend the most affordable retail offer for you based on your consumption habits, and yeah, using accurate data essentially. And you can also filter for features that you might prefer, such as 100% green power.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that, Lachlan. I'm just trying to switch my video on. There we go.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Thanks for that information. I'm going to have a go at that. There's a lot of questions, Lachlan, so we're going to have to move pretty quickly. But Mick had a question about shading on his roof and what are the options for solar panels?
Yeah, that's another great question. This is one of the places where microinverters are really handy. So if there's shading on, just say you have 8 solar panels and you have a tree that casts some shading on one of the panels, with a string inverter, especially some of the older ones, once the inverter registers shading or a limited generation on one of the panels, it essentially limits the generation or the efficiency of all of the panels. With microinverters, the shading on one of those panels won't affect the efficiency of the other panels. So if you have any issues with shading and you're looking to install a solar system, hopefully the solar installers, if you're with a reputable company, will suggest microinverters. I think the newer string inverters are better able to deal with shading, but as a general rule, shading is best dealt with by using microinverters.
Thanks, Lachlan. Over to you, Annie.
Thanks, Ray. This might follow on a bit from that question. There's a couple of questions about being limited by having a small roof size. So one of the questions is, if you can't fit a 5 kilowatt system on your roof, should you still get what you can fit? And the other one is similar. If you have a small roof area, how does the efficiency of the smaller dimension panels, I think this person might mean micro panels, compare with that of a standard size panel? And is there equivalent of those that would make up a standard size panel?
Sure. So that would depend on the specifications of each panel. I'm not across the smaller size panels, unfortunately. But in terms of if you can't fit 5 kilowatts on your roof, should you still get a system? Totally. Any solar is likely to pay itself off, especially the smaller systems, really, if your energy use is high enough if you have a high degree of self-consumption of that system, solar systems are some of the best investments you can make. So my emphasis around getting at least 5 kilowatts is more so about, you don't want to find yourself in a situation 10 years down the track where you feel like you should have maxed out your roof and you didn't, and now you may have higher energy use needs. If you can't fit that on your roof, I still think, yeah, it's certainly worth it. And panels are getting more and more efficient. So I think I mentioned that there are now 400 watt panels that are 1.7 meters by 1 meter. Apologies, I still can't speak to the smaller panel sizes. But as panels increase in efficiency, and I'm not able to forecast where they'll go, but you're able to fit larger system sizes, capacities in smaller spaces. So there may be some experts in the audience that are able to comment on that. One thing that's fantastic about the Metro Community Power Hub and working with groups like Lighter Footprints is that I often find there are people that know much more than me about certain topics. So if there is anyone that has some expertise on that, feel free to chime in. It'd be great. But just as a general comment, if you get an indicative quote, then part of that quote will be a calculation of payback and emissions reductions. So if you are only able to fit in 3 kilowatts or even less than that, go and get a free, no obligation indicative quote, and that will tell you whether it's worth it in the time frame that you're thinking of.
Okay, thanks, Lachlan. I really liked your talk about car batteries and the potential for using them to power your home, and as a mobile storage of energy. It's quite exciting, isn't it? But we have a question here from Tam. If you do use your battery at home to charge your house, will it shorten the life of that battery because it's going through more cycles?
Yeah, so the life of a battery is dependent on its cycles. So that's certainly the case. I guess at that point, it's a consideration of to what extent you want to prioritize the life of the battery for its vehicle operation, and to what extent you feel like you can prioritize the use of the battery to reduce your emissions and energy expenses at the home. So yeah, really valid point to bring up. That might be a sort of a personal choice. My thinking is that the batteries are, unfortunately, there is a sense of disposability about them, and the more that we can reduce our emissions through battery storage as soon as possible from a climate perspective, the better. So yeah, I guess that's my response. There's an element of personal choice worth being mindful of, dependent on the model of battery itself. but there are certainly steps you can take to maximize the life of the battery, not charging above 90%, not discharging below 10%, that sort of thing. Yeah, being gentle with it, I guess.
Thanks, Lachlan. It's a good answer. Over to you, Annie.
Thanks, Ray. Somebody has a question about the limits of where MCPH can operate. Is it just in metropolitan areas? Does it go as far, this person's asking, as Bacchus Marsh?
Bacchus Marsh, is that in the Shire of Moorabool?
Not sure.
I think I'll have to check that out. I mean, we can certainly connect you with the providers, and whether or not it counts as the Metro Community Power Hub or not, I don't really mind. If there is a community power hub in the Grampians region, which I think actually covers Moorabool, or maybe Barwon Southwest. The regions are a little funky, but if there's not an existing solar bulk buy program or something through those community power hubs, then I'm sure we'd be able to help out.
Awesome, that's good to know.
The next question is from Helen, who is chair of her owners corporation in apartment block of apartments. Most of the apartments are investment properties, and the owners don't want to part with any money. Should Helen go it alone?
Great question. That's a shame about the investment property owners. I'll give a brief answer now and a more extensive answer in a few months when we've finished our Solar for Apartments guide, which we're putting together with the help, or at least we're supporting Point Advisory, the consultancy, to do that. So that's very exciting. Should you go it alone? It depends on a few things. If you are able to secure the rights to part of the roof, you can have an individual solar system. Maybe that will encourage others. For the owners that don't occupy, I'm interested. So one of the things I'm really interested to, the nut that I want to crack is solar on rental properties. And that, I think, will need a similar project as the Solar for Apartments guide in terms of coming up with templates for contractual agreements and maybe amendments to rental agreements that allow landlords to benefit from solar as well as tenants. So at the moment, there's the issue of it's called a split incentive, where the landlords will bear the costs for the system and the tenants will bear the benefits in monetary terms, at least. So coming up with a contractual agreement that splits those benefits and makes it worthwhile for owners is really important. And that is going to be key to convincing other owners in your body corporate of the benefits of solar. You could also pursue a solar system for the communal energy expenses. There's usually communal lighting and things like that, which can be powered by solar. But to get back to your basic question, should you go it alone? I would present a few options to the body corporate, the ones that I've discussed, and maybe if we exchange a few emails, we can nut those out a bit more. But going it alone might be your best option if you want to get solar in a timely manner. But if you're happy to wait a few months, then you might have the support of a guide from the MCPH.
Thanks, Lachlan. Good luck, Helen. We have a question from John. Sorry, Annie.
You're right, you go ahead.
I have a question from John about time of day retail pricing and whether it's becoming more generally available. We've had a couple of plugs about Amber, and Matthew said that he couldn't get time of day retail pricing until he switched to Amber. So do you have any comments about time of day retail pricing, or do you want to give a plug to Amber?
Yeah, I'm with Amber. And for context for anyone who's not, Amber price their energy at essentially, they say wholesale market prices. So essentially they're reflecting the spot market price in the energy system at any one time. For a lot of the time, that's cheaper than the tariffs that you would pay with any retail plan. Most retail plans offer a static tariff, and they do that by hedging on the price of energy over time. So the price of energy in the market varies quite widely, and retailers essentially take a gamble on what they think is a profitable tariff, and then they pay the generators a certain amount, and they're hoping that they make enough money off that. Amber try to pass on the wholesale energy costs and then charge a subscription. And when I switched to Amber, it was ludicrously cheap. Over summer, the wholesale prices have been a bit higher than they were in spring, so it's not as ludicrously cheap. But overall, I do recommend Amber, but the caveat is that it really depends on your energy use, and if you're actively interested in it. If you just want to set it and forget it, it might not be for you. But the benefit is you can open your phone, look at the price of energy, look at the renewable content in the grid, which they advertise as a way to incentivize you using energy when there is more renewables in the grid. And then you can decide now's a good time to turn the heater on or something like that. That's the Amber aspect. With regard to time of use, I'm a little bit confused about the question, but my understanding of time of use tariffs is that they are set periods. So there might be a peak and an off-peak period that are set per day. Sometimes there are shoulder periods as well that are maybe bridging the gap. Sometimes peak tariffs are as high as 33 cents per kilowatt hour, and the off-peak tariffs can be a third of that. So depending on when you use the most power, they can be really cheap. They might be cheaper than Amber, but you just don't want to be using a lot of energy in those peak periods because it will be very expensive.
Thanks very much.
I haven't read the whole comment because I can't see the rest of it on my window, but there's a warning about Amber, and I recommend everyone check out the fine print and any warnings from people's personal experience. My experience has been good, but I don't want to be responsible for getting anyone stuck in the mud.
Fair enough. Thanks very much.
I don't know if I wanted to just, in terms of the time of use tariff, I don't know if this clears anything up, John, as well. I have a little bit of knowledge in this. If you have a single rate structure with your current retailer and you'd like to be on a time of use rate structure, you can ask them and they will probably be able to approve that or request that. That's just a little something that I happen to know, if that's what your question was asking. Sorry, jumping in there. Another chat question though is, how long does a solar system installation normally typically take from placing the order to the end of the installation?
Is this in a COVID context and an international crisis context? So yeah, this is a difficult question to answer. Depends on how many cooks are in the kitchen to some extent. Depends on if the salespeople or installers have contracted COVID, which has unfortunately been the case for some of our providers, and supply chain issues have not helped that either. So I've been with YEF for just over 6 months, and I don't feel that I can comment accurately on how long installations take. I would suggest within 3 months is ideal, but other people here probably have far more experience in their own pursuit of solar. But that my estimation is based on my experience, which has been hampered by COVID and the various crises we're dealing with in the world.
Thanks, Lachlan. Right at the very start, you mentioned the main reasons your interests were putting solar on were to reduce emissions and lower energy costs. One question that people throw up, to the owners of EVs all the time is about, the emissions involved in making the EVs. And we have a question here from Lynn, about reducing emissions in relation to the carbon embedded in producing or creating the battery. So, some people are concerned about issues like that. Do you have anything to say about that?
Sure. So one of the ways to be mindful of that when you're going about this is to replace things when they need to be replaced. Having said that, if we're to electrify everything and decarbonize the grid as soon as possible, that's not a viable option. I think Saul Griffiths is a great person to not necessarily chat to, he's a bit of a celebrity, but he has some graphs that demonstrate if we were to replace everything when it dies, then our overshoot is unacceptable, essentially, in terms of the emissions intensity of our grid. I really want to acknowledge the question, because the life cycle emissions for electrification are something to be mindful of, and that's why I generally, I'm not a maximalist. So I think if people would like to opt for a 15 kilowatt system with a massive battery to continue living a fairly inefficient life, that's not something that I advocate. People can get by on pretty small systems. I don't have a solar system, I'm renting. I think there are small steps that we can take that are more effective ultimately than going big. Another thing I'd say is that battery recycling, I hope, is something that Australia is really involved in. It's a big opportunity. Part of Yarra Energy Foundation's work is in community batteries, and we're hopeful that we'll be installing the first inner urban community battery in Australia on June 5th, or at least operating from June 5th. And we're using a battery that is in the high 90% recyclable material. And I think, not sure on the statistics, but my understanding is that it will be predominantly made of recycled materials, or at least future models will be. So battery recycling is one way to address that concern.
Ray, I might, and Annie and Lachlan, I might come in at that point and bring the question to a close. It's fantastic, Lachlan, to have you with really enjoyed your delivery style in particular, and your sort of thoughtful, the amount of thoughtfulness behind what you've presented and what the questions are is very apparent. So thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just going to rattle through 5 slides with a little bit more just to sort of round out the presentation on what to do next. So I'll share screen, and I'll just take probably 10 or 12 minutes to do. Can people see that? Yep. So actually, I'll put it on slideshow, so that's a bit easier. So look, fantastic. Just want to reinforce the fact that the Metro Community Power Hub, MCPH, there's the website again, .org.au/contact-us is backed by and been set up by Sustainability Victoria, which is a government department that sits inside the Victorian state bureaucracy. So or from Vic government to Sustainability Victoria, funding through grants and recurring funding into the Yarra Energy Foundation to set up the Metro Community Power Hub. That's why we are working with these folks, because they're independent advice. A lot of people out there, a lot of us and you in the audience will have sort of had to think about solar, and then it's maybe got one or two quotes, and then there's salesmen starting to sort of throw things at you, and it all gets a bit too much and you've backed away. What we're trying to do, and what the government has recognised through the MCPH, is there needs to be that trusted advice. You might not know the neighbour or the uncle or the whatever that can help you through it. These guys can help you through it. So there's their sort of outline of what they do. It's a one-stop hub for community energy solutions, and it's independent advice. There is no kickback from the suppliers and installers. This is being funded by government. That's why they can provide the service they provide. So there's the quote on the left. So if you want a quote from the MCPH, Metro Community Power Hub, go onto their website at the top, which Lachlan mentioned and I just repeated. So there it is again. If you want a quote for a solar or an all-electric home program, go on the left-hand side, go get a quote, enter your details. If you want personalised energy advice, which might be, oh, look, I know what I've got. I've got a hydronic system that I want to convert from gas to electric. So that's difficult to find people that you can bounce off. They can also do this personalised energy advice. I've got an office. Am I better off with a split system or a ducted system or a multi-head system? Where do I go? Those sorts of questions. So you might want to, above and beyond solar, you might want energy advice. So fill out the form on the right-hand side. Plug for our website. So lighterfootprints.org. Is it .org.au? I can never remember. It's either .org.au or .org. Go onto our website. So there's some solar stories there. That's one of our famous members, Rube's on the left there, but there's a whole lot of solar stories and some in a blog on our blog site under the tab called blog. The Solar Advantage is also outlined there. So and this is really interesting. Why do you do solar? A lot of people on this call will be doing it for emissions. Some will be doing it for cost. But just as Tim Forsey is finding with the all-electric home, a lot of what you get is the comfort. So now I've got my own electricity on my roof. It's pretty cheap. I'm starting to enjoy having the heater up, the thermostat up 1 more degree. I'm starting to be able to enjoy my hot shower because it's a heat pump instead of feeling guilty, and I've insulated my house. There's really a lot of psychology goes along with having your own electricity generated on your own roof, which is then creating this all-electric home that we're all going to head towards. There's another blog, Touring Tassie in a Tesla, written by Amy Hiller, the famous letter writer in the papers. Amy Hiller is in Lighter Footprint. She's written a fantastic blog about her family's trip around Tasmania. Really recommend that one on our Lighter Footprints website. Okay, couple more things coming up. So we've got Vote Climate 2022. We're not quite in federal election yet. It sort of half feels like we are, but I think we're going to know about it when the election's announced. We want people to come help us to get on and do what we want to do, which is going to be letterboxing a how to vote climate scorecard, which is going to be helping with bundling that up in those scorecards up into street maps. It's going to be street conversations. If that sounds like, if you want to get involved, if you want to shift the dial on this election to be a climate election, come along on Wednesday, March the 30th, Wednesday week, or Wednesday fortnight at 7 for 7:30 at the Marvel Centre on Balwyn North. RSVP on our website. We're really looking for numbers. It's going to be a fair bit of fun, and you never know, there might be an after party afterwards after the election. And I think this is second slide to last. We've got our Kooyong Candidates Forum. It used to be called the Town Hall. It's called the Hawthorn Arts Centre, but it's the Hawthorn Town Hall on April the 27th, and find out where the Kooyong candidates stand on climate. We want to make this election the vote climate election for our kids, for ourselves. This is, who knows, this might be the election where we really get some climate candidates up, or we shift the candidates that are standing, and we'll put real pressure on them. So come along, that's going to be outstanding. The bookings are up to 100 already. So get on, please, and RSVP to that. And my final slide is, there is another blog on our website, lighterfootprints.org, on our website, Reasons to Vote Climate. And we are starting to pitch this in Kooyong and other electorates like Higgins and Chisholm to say, this is not just about emissions. This is about actually having a strong economy. This is, you know, economic self-interest for Australia, that we have a healthy climate. It is a serious health issue. If the fires in New South Wales last summer before last, just gone, and Victoria the summer before that, and the horrendous bushfires in WA, and the extreme weather up on the East Coast in Queensland, New South Wales hasn't cut through, then you know, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's a serious health issue as well. It's a security issue. We're seeing what's going on in Ukraine and shenanigans with gas from Russia instead of gas from other parts of Europe. And we're an importer of oil. So it's a big security issue. If countries, I heard the term again today, that freedom energy is renewable energy. And so the sooner countries get on and make their own energy on their own shores from solar and wind, the better the planet's going to be for security, geopolitical security. And life on Earth, as we know, I'm sure everyone on this call knows, depends on a healthy climate. So there's a lot of reasons to vote climate. Go along to that blog on our website called Reasons to Vote Climate. And there's a whole lot of other good blogs there you might want to have a look at, but definitely have a look at that one. 16th of February, that was posted up there. So thank you to the audience, everyone out there. Thank you again to Lachlan and to Yarra Energy Foundation and the MCPH. Thanks to Ray and Annie. Thank you to Richard for helping set this up, and all the people behind the scenes. Lachlan with Lisa and Tim, and you folks there doing a fantastic job. Let's get more solar on more roofs in Boroondara and make Boroondara the solar capital of inner East Melbourne. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming along, and have a good night.